It was a quiet evening outside a busy government building in downtown Los Angeles. The sun was slowly setting, and people were rushing home after a long day at work. Police officers stood near the entrance, checking IDs and keeping order as usual. Among the crowd, a tall man walked calmly toward the building. He was wearing a black jacket, simple jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. No bodyguards, no fancy car, no attention-seeking behavior. It was Steven Seagal, but nobody recognized him. Steven had come for a private meeting related to community safety programs. He didn't want special treatment. He didn't want anyone to know who he was. He just wanted to walk in like a normal citizen. As he reached the entrance, one of the officers suddenly stepped in front of him. "Hey, stop right there," the officer said sharply. Steven paused and looked up. "Yes, officer." "Where do you think you're going?" the cop asked, scanning him from head to toe. "I have a meeting inside," Steven replied calmly. "Show me your ID," the officer demanded. Steven slowly reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. But before he could open it, another officer walked over, laughing quietly. "What's this guy doing here?" he whispered. "Looks suspicious." Steven heard it. He didn't react. He opened his wallet and handed over his ID. The first officer barely looked at it. "This doesn't prove anything," he said coldly. "I'm just here for a meeting," Steven repeated politely. The officer's face hardened. "Don't argue with me." "I'm not arguing," Steven replied. "I'm cooperating." Suddenly, the officer grabbed Steven's arm. "Step back," he ordered. People nearby stopped walking. Some turned their heads. Others slowed down. "What's going on?" someone whispered. Steven remained calm. "Officer, there's no need for this." But the cop wasn't listening. In a sudden burst of anger, he raised his hand and slapped Steven across the face. The sound echoed. Gasps filled the air. Phones came out. Everyone froze. Steven slowly turned his head back. His face was calm. No anger. No fear. Just quiet confidence. At that moment, nobody knew. This single slap had just started a chain of events that would change everything. The moment the slap landed, time seemed to freeze. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. People nearby stared in shock. A woman covered her mouth. A man whispered, "Did he really just do that?" Steven Seagal stood still. He didn't touch his face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react. Instead, he took a slow breath and looked straight at the officer. "Sir," Steven said calmly, "there was no reason for that." The officer scoffed. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" Another cop stepped closer, trying to look tough. "Maybe he was resisting," he said loudly. "I wasn't," Steven replied. More people stopped walking. Phones were now clearly visible. Red recording lights blinked in the air. A teenage boy whispered, "This is going online for sure." The first officer pointed at Steven's chest. "You're blocking a secure area. You don't belong here." "I was invited here," Steven said. "I can show proof." "Save it," the cop replied. "Guys like you always have excuses." Steven frowned slightly. "Guys like me," he repeated. The officer ignored him. He grabbed Steven's ID again and held it up. "This looks fake," he said. "It's real," Steven answered. "You can verify it." Instead of checking, the officer threw the ID back toward Steven. It fell on the ground. People gasped. A woman in the crowd said loudly, "That's disrespectful." The officer turned. "Mind your business, ma'am." Steven bent down and calmly picked up his ID. He dusted it off and placed it back in his wallet. "I'm still willing to cooperate," he said. That only made the officer angrier. "You think acting calm makes you smart?" "No," Steven replied. "It makes me responsible." Now even other officers were watching closely. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pretended nothing was wrong. A young cop whispered, "Maybe we should check his name." But the main officer ignored him. "Step to the wall," he ordered. "Why?" Steven asked. "For questioning." "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Then why am I being treated like this?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he tightened his jaw and said, "Because I said so." The crowd began murmuring, "This is harassment." He didn't do anything. "They're abusing power." Steven noticed the tension rising. He raised his hand slightly, showing he wasn't a threat. I respect the law, he said, but respect goes both ways. For a moment, the officer hesitated. Then he laughed. Don't lecture me. He signaled to another cop. Keep an eye on him. Steven was now surrounded. Lights from phones flashed. People were live streaming. Comments were already appearing online. And somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "Wait, doesn't he look like Steven Seagal?" Steven now stood near the cold concrete wall of the building, surrounded by 3 officers. People had completely stopped walking. What was supposed to be a normal evening had turned into a public spectacle. Dozens of phones were pointed at him. Some were recording quietly. Others were live streaming. Comments were flooding in online. Police abuse. This is wrong. Let him go. Steven could hear people whispering. Why are they treating him like this? He looks calm, not dangerous. One officer searched his pockets roughly. Hey, Steven said firmly. You can ask before touching me. Stay still, the officer replied. Another cop leaned close to his face. You think you're special, he mocked. Steven looked him in the eye. No, he answered. I think everyone deserves respect. That response annoyed them. The main officer crossed his arms. You're being difficult, he said. I'm being honest, Steven replied. A middle-aged man from the crowd spoke up. Officer, he hasn't done anything wrong. The officer snapped back. Step away, or you'll be next. Silence followed. Fear spread. People wanted to help, but were scared. Steven noticed that. He raised his voice slightly, not in anger, but in confidence. Everyone, it's okay. Please don't get involved. Some people were surprised. Even while being humiliated, he was protecting others. The officer smirked. Playing hero now. Steven ignored the comment. Instead, he closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath. Inside, he felt the pressure building. He was being insulted, disrespected, embarrassed in public. Any normal person would have lost control. But Steven didn't. He remembered his training, discipline, self-control, honor. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, He's handling this like a saint. Another said, If that was me, I would have exploded. One officer whispered to the main cop, Maybe we should run his name. Later, the officer replied. Steven heard it. Please, he said calmly. You can check my name now. It will clear everything. The officer laughed. Don't tell me how to do my job. He suddenly pushed Steven's shoulder. Stand straight. Steven stumbled slightly, but didn't fall. The crowd gasped. That's enough, someone shouted. Steven quickly spoke. Please, don't make this worse. His voice wasn't weak. It was strong, controlled, full of dignity. For a moment, even the officers hesitated. They weren't dealing with an angry man. They were dealing with someone unbreakable. Someone who refused to be humiliated. Someone who refused to hate. Somewhere in the crowd, a teenager zoomed in on Steven's face. He frowned. Wait, he whispered. Why does he look so familiar? The tension in front of the building was now impossible to ignore. More than 50 people had gathered. Cars slowed down. Some drivers even stopped to watch. Phones were everywhere. Red Live signs flashed on screens. Steven stood quietly, his back near the wall, his hands relaxed by his sides. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. The teenager who had been staring at Steven's face kept zooming in and out on his phone camera. Bro, I swear I've seen this guy before, he whispered. His friend shrugged. From where? He looks like a normal dude. The boy shook his head. No, man. Not normal. Famous. He quickly opened his gallery and searched through old pictures. Then he opened Google. He typed, Steven Seagal recent photo. A picture appeared. His eyes widened. Yo, Wyo, he shouted. What? His friend asked. He turned his phone. It's him. It's Steven Seagal. His friend leaned closer. No way. She compared the screen with the man standing near the wall. Same eyes. Same jawline. Same posture. Oh my God, it is him. They looked around. Should we tell people? She asked. Before he could answer, another woman nearby had also noticed. Wait, she said softly. Is that Steven Seagal? A man behind her responded. The action movie guy? Yes. from all those martial arts films. Whispers began spreading like wildfire. That's Steven Seagal, the movie star, the martial artist, the former law enforcement advisor. Phones zoomed in. Live chats exploded. OMG, it's him, face screaming in fear. They're disrespecting Steven Seagal. This is crazy. But in the middle of all this, Steven didn't change. He didn't smile. He didn't correct anyone. He didn't say his name. He stood quietly, humbly, as if none of it mattered. One of the younger officers noticed the crowd's sudden reaction. "Why are people acting weird?" he whispered. The main officer rolled his eyes. "They're just bored." But then he heard someone shout, "Leave him alone. That's Steven Seagal." The officer froze for half a second. Then he laughed. "You're right," he said. "Nice joke." Steven looked at him calmly. "I'm not here for attention," he said. "I'm here for a meeting." The officer smirked. "Sure you are." But doubt had already entered his mind. He looked again. Closer. More carefully. He noticed Steven's confident posture, his disciplined calmness, his controlled breathing. This wasn't a random man. This was someone trained. Someone important. Nearby, a security guard from inside the building stepped out. He scanned the crowd. Then his eyes landed on Steven. His face changed instantly. "Wait," he whispered. "Is that Mr. Seagal?" He walked closer, but before he could speak, Steven gently raised his hand. "Not yet." The guard stopped, confused. Steven wanted the situation to play out, not for revenge, but for truth, for fairness, for dignity. Meanwhile, social media was exploding. Police harassing Steven Seagal live. "This is unreal. Share this everywhere." Hashtag started trending. Hashtag respect Steven. Hashtag police abuse. Hashtag justice live. The main officer's radio crackled. "Unit 14, status check." He hesitated before replying. "All good," he said, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. Sweat formed on his forehead. He looked around. Too many cameras. Too many witnesses. Too much attention. Steven finally spoke again. Softly. "Officer," he said. "People are watching. Let's handle this professionally." The officer swallowed. "Don't tell me what to do," he replied, but weaker now. The crowd sensed it. Power was shifting. For the first time, the officers weren't in control. And Steven Seagal still hadn't revealed who he really was. Not yet. By now, the entire street had turned into a stage. People stood on sidewalks. Some leaned out of car windows. Others stood on benches just to get a better view. More than 100 phones were recording. Every word, every move, every expression. The main officer wiped sweat from his forehead and tried to regain control. "All right, everyone back up," he shouted. "This is police business." But no one moved. They had seen too much. Steven slowly lifted his head. For the first time since the slap, his eyes changed. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with authority. Quiet, unshakable. "Officer," Steven said, his voice calm but deep. "I have respected you since the beginning." The crowd went silent. I followed every instruction. I answered every question. I stayed peaceful even when I was disrespected. The officer scoffed nervously. "So what?" "So," Steven continued, "respect is not weakness." He took one step forward. The officers tensed. But he didn't raise his hands. He didn't threaten. He simply stood tall. "When you slapped me," Steven said, "you didn't just hit my face. You hit the law. You hit your uniform. You hit the trust people give you." Gasps filled the air. Some people started clapping softly. Steven looked around. At the crowd. At the cameras. At the officers. "This could have ended peacefully," he said. "You chose humiliation. You chose power over fairness." The main officer's voice cracked. "Watch your tone." Steven smiled slightly. "My tone is respectful," he replied. "My message is serious." He turned to the younger officers. "You joined this job to protect people," he said, "not to bully them." Some of them looked down, ashamed. One officer whispered, "He's right." Steven returned his gaze to the main cop. "You never asked who I was. You never checked my name. You never listened. Because in your mind, I didn't matter." The crowd murmured. That's true. He never even checked. Steven raised his voice, just enough to reach everyone. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be someone poor. Someone weak. Someone with no camera. His words hit hard. A woman wiped tears. A man nodded repeatedly. The officer clenched his fists. You think you're some kind of preacher now? He snapped. No, Steven answered. I'm someone who believes in justice. He paused. Let the silence grow. You have power, Steven continued. And power without character is dangerous. For a moment, nobody breathed. Even traffic seemed to stop. The officer tried to laugh it off. You talk big for someone in trouble. Steven's eyes locked onto his. I'm not in trouble, he said quietly. Your behavior is. That sentence spread through the crowd like fire. Wow. Did you hear that? He destroyed him calmly. The officer looked around. He saw cameras, witnesses, live chats. He realized something terrifying. He was losing. Steven took a deep breath. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, he said. I came here to attend a meeting about community safety. About better policing. About trust. People gasped again. A man shouted. Wait, what? Steven nodded. Yes, he said. I was invited. Because I care about this city. The officer's face tightened. Prove it, he demanded. Steven reached into his jacket slowly. Everyone held their breath. He pulled out a folded document and held it up. Official invitation, he said, with today's date. One of the younger officers leaned forward and read it. His eyes widened. Sir, this is real, he whispered to the main cop. This is from headquarters. The main officer's confidence shattered. His shoulders dropped. His voice lowered. Why didn't you say earlier? Steven answered calmly. Because respect should come first. Not fame. Not status. Not papers. The crowd erupted, clapping, cheering, whistling. Respect, legend, real man. Steven raised his hand. Please, he said. No insults. No hate. Let's learn from this. The officer stood frozen, broken, exposed, and deep inside, he knew something worse was coming. The street was completely silent now. No whispers, no shouting, no moving cars, only phones recording, only hearts pounding. The main officer stared at the document in Steven's hand. His lips were dry. His hands were shaking. That doesn't prove anything, he muttered weakly. But deep inside, he already knew. He was in serious trouble. Suddenly, the sound of sirens approached. A black police SUV slowly pulled up near the building. Two uniformed officers stepped out first. Then the back door opened. A tall man in a formal suit emerged. He walked with confidence, authority, purpose. Several officers instantly straightened their posture. Attention, one of them whispered. The man was Chief Commissioner Raymond Hale, one of the highest-ranking officers in the city. The crowd gasped. Is that the chief? Why is he here? The chief looked around. At the crowd. At the cameras. At Steven standing calmly near the wall. Then he walked straight toward him. Mr. Seagal, the chief said respectfully. I'm sorry you had to experience this. The main officer's face turned pale. Sir, I didn't know. The chief raised his hand. Silence, he said. He turned to the officers. Do you know who this man is? No one answered. Steven finally spoke. Calm. Clear. I didn't want to say it myself, he said. But I think now is the right time. He looked directly at the main officer. I'm the new chief of community oversight. Gasps exploded. What? No way. Did he just say chief? Steven continued. I was appointed last month. My role is to review police behavior. To improve trust. To stop abuse of power. The officer stumbled backward. And no, this can't be real. The chief nodded. It's true, he said. He works directly with my office. He reports to me. And today, he looked at the main officer. You gave him a perfect example of what's wrong. The officer's knees nearly gave out. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Steven shook his head slowly. That's the point, he replied. You shouldn't need to know. You shouldn't need a title. You shouldn't need fame. To treat someone with respect. The crowd burst into applause. Some people were crying. This is justice. He deserves it. The chief turned to the main officer. You slapped a civilian. You humiliated him. You abused your authority. On camera. In public. He took out a tablet. Internal Affairs is opening an investigation. Effective immediately. You are suspended. The officer dropped his head. Yes, sir. His badge felt heavier than ever. Steven walked closer. Not to insult him. Not to shame him. But to teach. Listen, Steven said softly. I don't hate you. I'm disappointed. You had a chance to represent the law with honor. You failed today. But you can learn. The officer looked up. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. Steven nodded. I accept your apology. But change matters more than words. The chief turned to the crowd. We will not ignore this. We will take action. We will do better. Cheers erupted. People felt heard, respected, safe. Steven raised his hand again. Please, he said. Let's stay peaceful. No insults. No threats. Only growth. Everyone quieted down. They listened. Because this wasn't just a celebrity. This was a leader. A role model. A man of principle. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. On YouTube. On Facebook. On TikTok. On Instagram. On X. Millions of people had already watched it. Steven Seagal slapped by cops, then reveals he's the new chief. Most powerful police moment of the year. Respect over revenge. Hashtags were trending worldwide. Hashtag respect Steven. Hashtag justice wins. Hashtag power with honor. Hashtag police reform. News channels replayed the footage again and again. Experts analyzed every second. This is a perfect example of dignity under pressure. One reporter said. He never lost control. Another added. He taught a lesson without violence. People from different countries shared their reactions. A man from Brazil wrote, This gave me hope. A woman from Pakistan commented, We need leaders like him. A student from Nigeria posted, This changed how I see authority. Steven's phone was filled with messages. Actors, athletes, politicians, community leaders, all praising his response. But Steven didn't celebrate. He didn't post flashy photos. He didn't give arrogant interviews. Instead, he released a simple statement. This incident is not about me. It's about how every person deserves respect. Uniforms give responsibility, not superiority. Those words went viral too. Schools started using the video in ethics classes. Police academies added it to training programs. Community centers organized discussions. How should authority be used? How do we treat people fairly? Even the officers who had been present that night were called in for special counseling and retraining. Not punishment alone, but education, growth, change. The main officer was officially suspended. After investigation, he was ordered to complete anger management, human rights training, and community service. Some people wanted him fired. Steven disagreed. Punishment without learning creates bitterness, he said. Learning creates leaders. Months later, that same officer publicly apologized in front of cameras. I was wrong, he admitted. I judged without knowing. I hurt someone who showed me mercy. I will never repeat that mistake. People respected that honesty. Meanwhile, Steven continued his work quietly. He visited poor neighborhoods. He met victims of police abuse. He listened more than he spoke. He trained officers personally in discipline and self-control. Strength without control is weakness, he often said. One evening, during a community event, a young boy approached him. Sir, the boy asked, weren't you scared that day? Steven smiled. Yes, he replied. But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing respect anyway. That line went viral too. Years later, people still remembered that night. Not because of the slap, not because of the humiliation, but because of the lesson. A lesson that said, you don't need power to be strong. You need character. You don't need revenge to win. You need wisdom. You don't need fame to matter. You already matter. That single moment had changed policies, changed attitudes, changed lives. And it all started with one man choosing dignity over anger, one man choosing peace over pride, one man choosing leadership over ego. Steven Seagal proved that true strength isn't shown in fists. It's shown in forgiveness, in patience, in standing tall without stepping on others. And for millions watching around the world, that was the real victory.